A strange thing about the human body is that its deepest bias does not feel like a bias at all. It feels normal. Across our species, most people reach, cut, throw, write, and protect themselves with the right hand, while the left hand becomes the quiet exception. Somewhere in deep human time, balance was not evenly shared. One side became common, and the other carried the cost of being rare. So why are 90% of humans right-handed, and what ancient split is hidden in our bones? A strange thing happens when a person reaches for the world. The body does not hold a debate. It does not pause to ask which side should begin. A cup sits on a table, a stone lies on the ground, a door handle waits in the dark, and for most people the right hand rises first, as quietly as breathing. Because this movement is ordinary, it almost disappears from attention. It feels natural, and what feels natural is often the hardest thing to see. Yet inside that small motion there is a long human question. If the body is built with two hands, two arms, two shoulders, and two sides that seem to mirror one another, why has one side become so strongly favoured across our species? The answer cannot be reduced to a single moment, a single gene, or a single ancient invention. It is safer and more truthful to begin with the fact that human life has always depended on repeated actions. To lift, to hold, to scrape, to cut, to carry, to gesture, to comfort, to defend, and later to mark signs on clay, bone, bark, skin, paper, or stone. Each action asks the body for order. One hand often steadies the world, while the other changes it. One hand holds the food, the hide, the branch, the tool, or the child close enough to be worked with. The other hand moves with a slightly sharper roll. It strikes, turns, pulls, presses, guides, or points. This division may feel simple now, but in the deep background of human origins it matters. Long before writing made the right hand visible in classrooms and documents, long before rules of manners taught one side to be proper and the other side to be awkward, the human body was already living in landscapes where skill could mean safety. A hand that learned a movement well could repeat it with less waste. A body that repeated a movement could become more reliable. A group that watched skilled movements could pass them forward, not by explanation alone, but by seeing how one body handled stone, wood, food, fibre, and fire. In that slow world, the beginning of a movement was not separate from the beginning of human learning. Still, this does not mean that prehistoric people all behaved the same way, or that every ancient tool can tell us the hand that used it. The past rarely speaks with that kind of clarity. What it gives us are traces, and traces must be treated gently. A scratch on a tooth, a worn edge on a tool, a stronger bone on one side, a pattern repeated across many remains. Each is a small clue, not a full confession. But when a quiet pattern appears again and again, it invites us to ask whether handedness is not merely a habit, but one of the oldest shadows cast by the human body. Modern people inherit more than bones and muscles. They inherit a way of organizing action. A child reaching for a spoon today does not remember ancient camps, stone flakes, animal skins, or the long work of survival. Yet the child's nervous system grows inside a human body shaped by that long inheritance. The preference may be guided by biology, strengthened by practice, influenced by surroundings, and later supported by culture. None of those layers needs to act alone. The mystery begins in their overlap. The right hand became common enough to feel invisible, while the left hand remained close, capable, and rare enough to remind us that human beings are not copies of one another. The split is not a flaw in the body. It is a record of how bodies learn direction in time, and how ordinary movements can carry a history older than memory, older than speech, and older than the first names people gave to themselves. In the long childhood of our species, the deeper paradox is not that one hand is useful. Both hands are useful. The quiet problem is that a creature built with two capable sides did not keep its behavior evenly divided between them. Human beings are not like a pair of tools placed side by side on a table, waiting to be chosen with perfect fairness. From early childhood, most bodies begin to lean. One hand reaches with more certainty. The other follows, supports, holds, steadies, balances, and waits. This is not weakness. It is organization. But organization always raises a question. Why should the organization fall so often in the same direction? If handedness were only random, we might expect the world to contain a much more even mixture of right and left preferences. If it were only culture, we might expect it to change sharply from place to place the way clothing, ritual, language, or law can change. Yet the human pattern appears broader and older than any single custom. That does not make it simple. It makes it more interesting. The body may have carried a tendency, the surrounding world may have strengthened it, and generations may have passed it forward through practice before anyone had a word for right, left, normal, or unusual. To understand this, we have to imagine the human body not as an abstract shape, but as a working animal in time. Two hands do not always do the same job, because survival rarely asks for perfect symmetry. When food must be cut, one hand may hold while the other slices. When a stone core is struck, one hand may stabilize while the other delivers the blow. When fiber is twisted, skin is scraped, or a child is carried close to the body, the two sides may share the labor without being equal in role. Over many repetitions, a small preference can become a stable pathway. The muscles become familiar with it. The eyes expect it. The brain prepares it more easily. Other people see it and may copy it. A young learner does not need a formal lesson to notice which hand an older person uses to strike a flake from stone or guide a sharp edge along material. In the long beginning of humanity, learning was often bodily before it was verbal. A movement seen many times could become a movement repeated many times. This is where the question returns to our origins. The ancient human body did not live in a world of separate categories called biology and culture. It lived in weather, hunger, danger, family, imitation, and work. A hand preference could belong to all of these at once. It could be partly rooted in the nervous system, partly reinforced by the tasks that hands performed, and partly carried through the quiet pressure of a group where most skilled actions were demonstrated from the same side. Still, there is a danger in making the pattern too neat. Ancient people were not machines following a hidden rule. Some were likely stronger on one side, some on the other, some more mixed than our simple labels can describe. The past did not produce a clean line between right and left. It produced bodies living through days. Yet the broad leaning remains. In our own time, the right hand has become so ordinary that it can feel almost invisible, while the left hand stands out because it interrupts expectation. That is the strange thing about a majority pattern. It hides by becoming the background. Chairs, desks, handles, tools, lessons, greetings and writing systems can all make one side feel natural without asking why. But before those later worlds existed, before classrooms, machines, and written rules, the split may already have been growing in the repeated work of early human life. The mystery is not whether the right hand is better. It is why so many human bodies came to begin action from the same side, while still preserving the rare and persistent possibility of the other. The number itself can mislead us, if it is treated as a verdict. To say that most humans are right-handed is not the same as saying that the right hand won a simple contest. Bodies do not carry history in such a clean way. A hand preference is not a crown placed on one side and taken away from the other. It is closer to a path worn into the ground by many feet, easy to follow because it has already been followed before. The right hand becomes the usual path, but the left hand remains present, intelligent, sensitive, and necessary. Every ordinary task shows this quiet partnership. When a person cuts fruit, ties a knot, opens a jar, washes a face, or lifts a sleeping child, the two hands are not enemies. They are a pair with different duties. One often leads the action, while the other gives the action a world to work against. Without the steady hand, the skilled hand would lose its ground. That simple truth keeps us from turning handedness into a story of superiority. The better question is not why one hand is better, but why human action settled so often into a familiar arrangement. Biology offers one doorway into the question. The nervous system is not arranged like a perfectly even map. Each side of the brain is connected with the opposite side of the body, and many human functions show some degree of side preference. But this does not mean the matter is solved by pointing to the brain alone. A brain grows inside a body that moves, practices, watches, and learns. A child may begin life with small tendencies, that become clearer through thousands of repeated acts. Those acts occur in a home, a community, a material world, and later a culture filled with objects already shaped by earlier users. Near the beginning of the human story, before writing and formal teaching, such repetition would still have mattered. A young person watching an older one shape stone, carry food, scrape material, or gesture during shared work would see not only the tool, but the side from which the tool was handled. Culture offers another doorway, but it is also incomplete by itself. Many societies have favoured the right hand in manners, labour, writing, or ritual, sometimes gently, sometimes with pressure. That can strengthen a majority pattern. Yet culture may be amplifying something older, not inventing it from nothing. The archaeological record cannot speak in full sentences, but it gives cautious hints that hand preference reaches deep into human time. Some fossil teeth show angled scratches that may reflect how material was held and cut near the mouth. Some arm bones and tool use patterns have been studied for signs of repeated one-sided action. None of these clues should be forced to say more than they can. Still, the existence of such clues reminds us that the split is not only a modern classroom habit or a rule imposed by recent society. It may belong to the long relationship between hands, tools, learning, and the brain. This is why the question must stay open at the start. The right-handed majority may be a biological tendency, a learned habit, a social inheritance, a practical advantage in shared work, or a slow braid of all these forces. Each layer touches the others. A nervous system makes certain movements easier. A repeated movement builds skill. Skill becomes visible to others. Others imitate it. Imitation shapes tools, customs, and expectations. Expectations return to the child as an environment. Across generations, the circle can grow so familiar that no one inside it notices the circle anymore. Human origins are often hidden in exactly this way, not only in dramatic fossils but in gestures so common they no longer feel ancient. To reach with the right hand may be to enter a pattern older than memory, while to reach with the left may preserve the quiet reminder that our species never moved as one single body, but as many bodies finding direction together. Before a hand could become a maker of tools, it was first a living surface of touch, pressure, balance, and grip. The human hand did not appear in the world as a writing instrument, a hammer, or a blade holder. It came from a much older primate body, where fingers helped an animal hold branches, pull food closer, cling to a mother, climb through uneven spaces, and feel the shape of the world before committing weight to it. In that older setting, the hand was not separate from movement. It belonged to the whole body. This matters because the story of right-handedness cannot begin with writing desks or school rules. It has to begin much earlier, with a body learning how to survive by contact. The palms were not symbols. They were boundaries between the animal and everything it touched. A branch could be smooth or brittle. A fruit could be firm or soft. A stone could fit the palm or slip away. The ancient background of the human hand lies in these small judgments, repeated without language for a long time. Among living primates, hand use can vary with posture, task, and situation, and it would be careless to make them into perfect mirrors of early humans. Still, they remind us that a hand preference is rooted in a moving body, not in an isolated hand floating free from life. When an animal climbs, one hand may reach while the other holds. When it feeds, one hand may gather while the mouth and other limbs remain involved. When it protects itself, the body chooses positions quickly, not evenly. The first doorway into the human split, then, is not a sudden choice between right and left. It is the gradual possibility that two similar hands could begin to take different roles during repeated action. Before stone tools became central signs of human ancestry, the body already knew how to coordinate unequal duties. One side could bear weight, another could reach. One hand could anchor, another could explore. These roles may shift from moment to moment, but they show that symmetry in shape does not require symmetry in use. Human origins carried this older primate inheritance forward while also changing it. As some of our ancestors spent more time upright, the hands were less tied to supporting the body on the ground. This did not happen in one clean step, and it should not be imagined as a sudden freeing of the hands for invention. It was a long anatomical and behavioral change, with many extinct relatives and many environments involved. But over time, walking on two legs made the hands available for more frequent carrying, holding, reaching, and making. The hand could now meet the world while the feet carried the body. That shift did not create right-handedness by itself. It opened a field where hand skill could matter in new ways. A hand no longer used mainly for locomotion could become more involved in food processing, object handling, social contact, and learned tasks. In such a world, repeated use could begin to leave its quiet marks on behavior. The human hand also carries a strong thumb, sensitive fingertips, and a wide range of grips. But these features are not magic explanations. They are conditions that made skilled action possible. A precise grip does not decide which hand will lead. A flexible wrist does not choose culture. A sensitive fingertip does not invent language. Yet together, these traits allowed the two hands to become instruments of attention. They made it possible for one side to hold a piece of the world steady while the other worked on it. That simple arrangement may be one of the oldest foundations beneath the later right-handed majority. Before the hand became a tool, it became a partner of vision, balance, memory, and repeated touch in the slow beginning of our species. Walking on two legs did not turn the hand into a tool overnight. It changed the conditions around the hand slowly, across bodies, landscapes, and generations. In older primate movement, the forelimbs often helped carry weight, climb, brace, and shift the body through branches or across uneven ground. In the human line, as upright walking became more important, the hands gradually spent less time serving as supports for travel and more time meeting objects in front of the body. This was not a clean march toward progress. It was a long adjustment in anatomy and behavior, shaped by changing environments and by many relatives who did not all live in the same way. Yet the broad consequence is important. When the feet carry the body, the hands can carry the world. They can lift food, gather plants, hold infants, bring objects close to the eyes, and keep material steady long enough for attention to settle. This change matters for the question of right-handedness, because a freed hand is not only a free hand, it is a hand that can repeat a task. Repetition is where preference becomes visible. A person who often uses one side to hold a stone and the other to strike may begin to feel a difference between the two roles. One hand becomes the anchor, the other becomes the moving edge. A child watching such behavior would not need to understand evolution, brain structure, or tradition. The body learns by seeing bodies. It learns how weight is shared, how force is delivered, how a hand turns toward an object, and how the other hand makes that object still enough to change. Near the beginning of human life, before written teaching, before formal craft names, before anyone separated biology from custom, this kind of learning may have carried great importance. It is also here that caution is needed. Upright walking alone does not explain why most humans became right-handed. Many animals show side preferences in some tasks, and many factors influence how a body chooses a side. The point is not that walking caused the right hand to dominate. The point is that walking changed the stage on which hands acted. It allowed hands to become more available for skilled, repeated, visible action. Once that stage existed, small biases could have more room to grow. The nervous system might prepare one side a little more readily. A practice movement might strengthen that readiness. A group might make that movement easier to copy. Over time, these layers could lean together. The ancient body was never simply a machine of bones. It was a living arrangement between balance, vision, touch, memory, and need. Standing upright brought the hands into a new relationship with the face and eyes. Objects could be raised, inspected, turned, and worked with near the center of attention. Food could be carried while walking. A tool could be transported from one place to another. A sharp edge could be saved instead of abandoned immediately. These ordinary possibilities helped create a world where hand skill could gather history. Every carried object extended the usefulness of the hand beyond the moment of finding it. Every repeated action gave the body another chance to organize itself. If one side more often became the side of precise movement, that preference could become deeper through use, not because the other side was useless, but because the two sides were learning different duties. The left hand in many right-handed actions is not absent. It is the quiet holder of the task, It keeps the world from moving away. That partnership may reach back to the first long period in which human ancestors relied on hands no longer devoted mainly to locomotion. The split hidden in our bones begins not with a decision but with a posture, a repeated movement, and the slow freedom of two hands learning different roles. A hand preference becomes easier to understand when the two hands are seen not as rivals, but as partners doing different kinds of work. In many ordinary actions, the body does not ask both hands to perform the same movement. It asks one side to make the object stay, and the other side to make something happen. One hand holds the branch, the hide, the fruit, the stone, the cord, the bowl, or the edge of a garment. The other hand pulls, scrapes, twists, strikes, cuts, presses, or guides. This arrangement is so familiar that it can vanish from awareness. Yet it may be one of the quiet foundations beneath the human pattern of handedness. If the same side leads again and again, not because the other side is weak, but because the whole body has found a dependable rhythm, then preference can grow without ever needing a conscious choice. The holding hand and the acting hand build a small system together. Remove either one, and the task becomes harder. This matters when thinking about human origins, because early skill was rarely a matter of one hand alone. Making a sharp edge from stone, preparing food, carrying material, shaping fibre, or working with wood all require control over movement and control over stillness. Force without steadiness wastes energy. Steadiness without movement changes nothing. The two hands create a field where attention can settle. A stone held close enough to the eyes can be turned, judged, and struck. A piece of food held steady can be cut in a safer way. A strip of material held tight can be scraped or twisted. These examples should not be treated as exact scenes from a known prehistoric day. They are careful ways to think about the kinds of tasks that hands are capable of, and about the kind of bodily organization such tasks require. The archaeological record can show tools and marks, but it cannot fully restore the breath, hesitation, learning, and small corrections inside a living movement. Still, the logic of the body is important. Skilled action often needs a leading side and a supporting side. Once a young body begins to repeat that arrangement, the movement becomes easier to call upon. The shoulder prepares, the eyes follow, the fingers learn expected pressure, the brain strengthens familiar roots. A preference can become a habit before it becomes an identity. In deep human time, this would have been joined to observation. A learner, watching an older body at work, would not only see the shape of a tool, the learner would see how the body stood, how the object was held, where the force came from, and which side made the fine adjustment. Imitation is never perfect, but it can carry direction. When many people in a group use similar arrangements, the shared world may begin to favor them. Tools may be passed from one hand position to another. Teaching may become easier when gestures match. Even before formal language, the visible side of action could have mattered. This does not mean that right-handedness began as a rule. It may have begun as a leaning, strengthened by use, made more visible through skilled work, and later supported by culture. The left hand remained essential inside the pattern. In a right-handed task, it often holds the world still enough for the right hand to work. That quiet role is easy to overlook because attention follows movement, not support, but the support is part of the movement. It began with bodies facing materials before them, trying again, learning small corrections, and passing movements onward through eyes, hands, memory, and shared attention over time. The ancient split hidden in our bones may therefore be less like a victory of one side, and more like a long division of labour within the body, repeated across generations until one arrangement became common enough to feel natural. The human body looks balanced from a distance. A face has two eyes, two ears, two cheeks. The shoulders spread to either side. The arms hang like matched branches from the same trunk. The hands appear as twins, each with a palm, a thumb, fingers, nails, skin, warmth and feeling. Yet the closer we look, the less perfect that mirror becomes. The body is not a drawing folded cleanly down the middle. It is a living history of small differences. The heart rests more to one side. The liver fills more space on the other. One eye may guide attention more strongly. One ear may be preferred when listening in noise. One foot may step first. One shoulder may carry weight more easily. One hand may find certainty sooner than its partner. These differences do not mean the body is broken. They mean life does not require perfect symmetry in order to move well. Real organisms grow through pressures, habits, tissues, and repeated use. Growth itself is never a perfectly equal event on both sides. Muscles respond to work, bones respond to strain, nerves respond to practice. The living body becomes shaped by what it has done, and by what earlier bodies made possible. To understand why most humans reach with the right hand, we first need to let go of the idea that the two sides were ever meant to behave exactly alike. Deep in human origins, long before names, tools with handles, written symbols, or formal customs, bodies already lived with uneven duties. An animal turning toward food, bracing against ground, holding an infant, climbing, carrying, or watching a movement does not distribute every action evenly for the sake of fairness. It uses what works. If one side begins slightly ahead in a task, and if that task is repeated across childhood, work, and learning, the small difference can become familiar. Familiarity then feels like nature. The right hand may rise first not because the left hand lacks value, but because the whole body has learned a stable arrangement. A similar asymmetry appears inside the nervous system. The brain is divided into two hemispheres, connected and communicating, but not identical in every role. Each side of the brain helps control the opposite side of the body. The left side of the brain is often strongly involved in fine control of the right hand, especially in many right-handed people, while other functions can be distributed in complex ways. This should be said carefully. Brain asymmetry does not solve the entire question. It does not mean every person fits one simple map. It does not mean the left side of the brain is always the same in everyone, or that the right hand became common for one single reason. The human nervous system is more flexible than a slogan. Still, its uneven organization gives an important clue. The body is built for coordinated difference. A movement can be prepared more readily on one side. A skill can be practiced more often on that side. A community can then build objects and routines around the common pattern. Over long periods, biology and experience may reinforce one another. The ancient split hidden in our bones may therefore begin with a quieter fact. Human symmetry is visible, but human action is not symmetrical. The two hands share one body, yet they enter the world with different histories of use. One may lead a gesture, while the other steadies the object. One may strike, while the other holds. One may write, while the other keeps the page still. In every age, from early tool use to modern rooms, the body has used difference as a way of creating order. Right-handedness is not a strange exception to human design. It is one example of a deeper pattern, where life preserves balance not by making both sides identical, but by letting each side find its place in the work of being human. The brain adds another layer to the quiet imbalance of the human body. It is tempting to say that the left side of the brain controls the right hand, and therefore the mystery is solved. But that would make a living system too simple. The two hemispheres of the brain do communicate with opposite sides of the body, and for many people the left hemisphere is strongly involved in the fine control needed by the right hand. Yet the brain is not a switchboard with one clean label for every human action. Movement, touch, vision, planning, attention, memory, and learning all join when a hand reaches for something. Even a small act, such as picking up a cup or turning a stone in the palm, is not only muscle, it is prediction. The eyes estimate distance, the shoulder prepares, the fingers expect weight, the wrist adjusts before the object is fully held. The brain has already made a small map of what the hand is about to do. If one side has been used again and again for careful movement, that map may become easier to call upon. This is one reason handedness must be understood as a process, not a single cause. A child does not wake one morning with the whole pattern completed. Preference becomes clearer through reaching, grasping, feeding, pointing, drawing, throwing, and copying other bodies. The nervous system may begin with tendencies, but experience gives those tendencies shape. The old human question returns here because early people also lived through repeated hand actions before they could leave written explanations of themselves. A stone edge, a strip of material, a gathered plant, a carried infant, or a shared piece of food required the brain and the hands to work together in practical time. The hand that moved most often did not move alone. It moved inside a body that had to stand, look, judge, remember, and correct mistakes. Over many generations, if a common direction made learning smoother or action more reliable, that direction could become part of the ordinary human background. But care is needed again. Not every right-handed person has the exact same brain pattern. Not every left-handed person is simply the reverse of a right-handed person. Human brains vary, and left-handed people often show more mixed patterns of organization. That variation is important because it protects the story from becoming rigid. The majority pattern is real, but it is not a rule that erases the minority. It is more like a strong current in a wide river, visible in the general flow, but never identical in every drop of water. Brain asymmetry may help explain why one side became common, yet it does not stand outside the rest of life. The brain develops while the body moves. The body moves inside a material world. The material world is shaped by older hands, older habits, and older tools. A handle, a blade, a writing direction, or a practiced gesture can return to the nervous system as an expectation. This circle is slow enough to feel invisible. It begins in biology, passes through action, becomes habit, enters culture, and then returns to each new child as the world already arranged around them. In that sense, the ancient split hidden in our bones is also hidden in preparation, timing, and ease. The right hand often feels ready before thought arrives. The left hand often steadies the object before attention notices its help. The brain coordinates both sides, but it does not need to make them equal to make them useful. This is why the question must remain gentle, even when the pattern appears strong. Human life has always depended on cooperation within the body as much as cooperation between bodies. The deeper lesson is not that one half of the brain commanded history. It is that unevenness, when repeated patiently through movement and learning, can become one of the quiet forms of human order. Biology rarely seeks perfect balance for its own sake. A living body is not a statue built to satisfy a mirror. It is a working arrangement shaped by growth, use, inheritance, and need. When a movement must be done again and again, the body often settles into a dependable pattern instead of distributing effort evenly. The pattern may begin as something small. One hand reaches sooner, one shoulder turns more easily, one eye guides an object with more confidence. One side of the brain prepares a familiar action with less delay. None of these differences needs to be dramatic. Over time, small differences can become the ground on which larger habits stand. This is one way to think about why right-handedness belongs to the wider story of human asymmetry. The body keeps balance not by making both sides identical, but by letting them cooperate through difference. A walker does not step with both feet at once. A maker does not ask both hands to strike the same blow. Work is divided so action can become smooth. In human origins, this kind of coordination would have mattered long before any person could explain it. An early human body facing stone, wood, food, fibre, skin, water, or fire needed order in movement. It needed one side to begin, another to support, vision to guide, memory to compare, and touch to correct. The question of the right hand is therefore not only about the hand. It is about how the whole body organizes useful behavior. If a common arrangement made tasks easier to learn, watch, or pass forward, that arrangement could become more frequent without being planned. This does not require imagining a sudden ancient decision. It only requires many bodies, tasks, and young learners seeing how skilled adults moved. A child who copies a gesture copies more than the visible goal. The child also copies timing, posture, angle, force, and the side from which action begins. In this quiet way, biology and experience can lean into each other. A nervous system may make one direction easier. Practice may make it easier still. Shared work may make it visible. Culture may later give it rules, meanings, and tools. Beneath those layers there remains a simple living fact. The human body is a system of unequal cooperation. The right hand often receives attention because it moves with force or precision. The left hand often disappears into the task because it holds the background steady. Yet the background is not passive. It is the condition that allows action to happen. When a person writes, one hand moves the mark while the other holds the page. When a person cuts, one hand guides the blade while the other keeps the material from sliding away. When a person shapes, ties, or carries, both sides join the result in different ways. The ancient split hidden in our bones may reflect this old cooperation more than any simple victory of one side over the other. It also reminds us that evolution does not always erase variation. Left-handedness remained, and that persistence matters. A strong majority can exist alongside a steady minority because living populations are not designed like machines. They carry variation, and variation keeps the story from becoming too neat. The right-handed majority may show a deep tendency in our species, but the left-handed minority shows that the tendency was never absolute. Between them is the truthful picture. Bodies shaped by inherited structure, development, tasks, imitation, and long history. Near the beginning of human life, such forces were not separate. They were the same daily world. A hand reaching for stone, holding food near the mouth, steadying a child, or pointing toward danger belonged to one continuous life. The body learned direction because life asked for action, and action became easier when it began from a familiar side. What looks like a small personal preference today may therefore be a quiet echo of an old human solution. Not perfect symmetry, but reliable cooperation. Bone is often imagined as something silent and still, but in a living body it is never completely passive. It grows, thickens, repairs, and responds to the pressures placed upon it. Every step, every lift, every grip, every repeated strain asks the skeleton to carry a record, not in words, but in structure. This is why bones can become a careful doorway into the question of handedness. They do not tell us what a person thought. They do not tell us the full story of a day. They cannot say with certainty why one arm was used more than the other, but they can sometimes show that a body lived with unequal demands. A shoulder joint may carry signs of repeated stress. An upper arm bone may be slightly stronger or shaped by heavier use. The places where muscles attach may reflect long patterns of movement. These clues must be read slowly, because a bone is not a diary written for us. It is more like ground worn by weather and footsteps, where the path is visible only after much passing. In modern life, the idea is easy to understand. A worker who uses one arm for years may develop more strength on that side. A person who writes, throws, lifts, cuts, or plays an instrument may feel the difference between the leading hand and the supporting hand. The body remembers what it repeats. In the deep human past, that same principle may help researchers think about ancient remains. If a skeleton shows differences between the right and left sides, those differences might reflect habitual activity. Yet caution is essential. Bones can be shaped by age, injury, nutrition, sex, illness, environment, and the particular tasks of one life. A stronger right arm does not automatically prove a universal right-handed society. A single skeleton cannot carry the whole history of humankind. Even a group of skeletons must be understood with care, because the people who are preserved are only a small and uneven sample of those who once lived. Still, bones matter because they bring the question back to the body. Handedness is not only a preference felt in the mind. It is a pattern that can pass through muscles, joints, and repeated labour. Near the beginning of human life, when written records did not exist, and when most learning was held in practice rather than in text, the skeleton may have carried traces of daily skill. A body that often struck, scraped, carried, or held materials from one side might slowly become shaped by that unequal rhythm. This does not mean every mark can be understood clearly. The past resists simple answers, but the body leaves evidence when action becomes ordinary. The ancient split hidden in our bones is therefore not a dramatic secret buried in one fossil. It is a possible pattern formed across many small signs. A hand preference may appear in the way the arm developed, the way the shoulder was loaded, or the way muscle use left faint signatures on the skeleton. The bones do not speak loudly, but they remind us that behavior is physical. A habit is not only something a person does, it is something the body learns to carry. Over a lifetime, use and structure meet each other. Over generations, if similar habits are repeated by many people, the pattern becomes more than personal. It becomes part of how a population moved through its world. That is why the question of right-handedness can be approached through bone without pretending that bone gives the entire answer. The skeleton offers a slow, cautious witness. It tells us that the body is shaped by action, and that some of the most ordinary actions may have been repeated long enough to leave their shadow inside the frame of human beings. The hardest thing about reading ancient evidence is learning how little it can honestly say. A mark on a tooth may be real, but it is not the same as a voice. A stronger arm bone may reflect repeated work, but it cannot explain the whole life that made the bone stronger. A stone flake may preserve a movement, an angle, or a mistake, but it cannot name the person who held it, or tell us whether that movement was ordinary, forced, learned, playful, tired, careful, or rushed. This is why the ancient split hidden in our bones has to be approached with patience. It is not a code waiting for one perfect translation. It is a slow pattern built from many incomplete clues. Each clue has a boundary. A tooth scratch may suggest how something was cut near the mouth, but the material itself may be gone. An arm bone may show greater use on one side, but the reason for that use may be uncertain. A tool may carry marks left by production, use, damage, transport, or later disturbance. Even when the evidence is genuine, the meaning is not always simple. In the deep beginning of humanity, bodies lived in conditions we can only partly reconstruct. They worked with materials that decayed, in weather that left no memory, through gestures that vanished the moment they were made. The skeleton and the stone are what remain, but most of the living world around them is missing. That missing world should make us careful, not silent. Caution does not mean refusing to think. It means allowing evidence to remain smaller than imagination. One person's remains cannot represent all people. One site cannot represent all landscapes. One tool-making habit cannot represent every group of early humans. But when similar hints appear in different kinds of evidence, the question gains weight. If teeth, arm bones, and experimental tool studies all suggest that one side was often used more actively, then handedness becomes more than a modern classroom habit. It becomes a possible thread running through the long material history of our species. The word possible matters. Science is strongest here, when it does not pretend to know more than the record permits. What can be said with more safety is that the human body is capable of leaving traces of repeated side use, and that researchers have found clues consistent with ancient hand preference in more than one kind of evidence. What cannot be said honestly is that every ancient person was right-handed, or that one discovery proves the entire origin of handedness. The past was never that tidy. Early humans and their relatives lived across different places, climates, bodies, and tasks. Some individuals may have favoured the right hand strongly, some may have favoured the left. Some may have used both hands in ways that modern labels do not capture well. The broad human pattern may have been growing, but it was growing through variation. That is important, because variation is not noise outside the story. It is part of how living populations exist. The right-handed majority and the left-handed minority belong to the same human inheritance. Bones help us see this because they bring the question back to time. A habit repeated for one afternoon vanishes. A habit repeated for years may change muscle, posture, and bone. A habit repeated across generations may shape tools, teaching, and expectation. Near the origin of our kind, before written records preserved names and events, these repeated bodily choices may have been one of the main ways history moved forward. Not through plans, not through declarations, but through practiced action. One hand held, another acted. One body learned, another watched. A child copied not only a task, but a direction. The ancient evidence remains fragmentary, yet it points toward a quiet truth. Ordinary movements can outlive the people who made them, not as memories, but as marks, edges, stresses, and patterns left behind for later eyes to read with care. Stone tools ask us to slow down because they are easy to misunderstand. From a distance, a flake stone can look like a simple object, almost crude, as if it needed only strength and a hard blow. But the making of a sharp edge is not just force. It is rhythm, angle, timing, grip, patience, and the ability to hold one piece of matter steady while another piece strikes it in a controlled way. A stone core does not become useful because a hand hits it randomly. The blow has to meet the surface at a workable angle. The maker has to judge where the force will travel. Too little force may do nothing. Too much may break the stone in a way that ruins the intended edge. This is why stone tools are so important to the question of handedness. They bring the hand preference into the material world. A body making a tool has to divide labour between its sides. One hand may hold the core, adjust its position, and keep it from turning. The other may guide the hammerstone, deliver the strike, and correct the next movement. Both hands matter, but they do not matter in the same way. The leading hand draws attention because it moves, but the holding hand makes the movement possible. Near the beginning of human tool use, this partnership may have been repeated so often that it helped make side preference more visible in daily life. A toolmaker could not rely only on intention. The hands had to learn through failed flakes, broken edges, awkward grips, and small improvements that came only after many attempts. In such repetition, the body does not remain neutral. The fingers remember pressure. The wrist remembers turning. The shoulder remembers how far to lift. The eyes begin to expect the path of the striking hand. If the same side performs the more active motion again and again, it may become the side that feels prepared before thought fully forms. This does not mean early humans chose right-handedness as a plan. It means skilled work may have offered a place where an existing bias could become stronger. Stone tools also show why the right hand should not be treated as a lonely hero. A flake can only be struck from a core that is being managed. The core must be held, tilted, braced, and sometimes rotated between attempts. That quieter work may fall to the other hand, and in many right-handed actions it is the left hand that gives the task its stability. This older bodily partnership can still be felt in modern actions. When someone sharpens a pencil, cuts cloth, opens a bottle, or writes across a page, one hand often performs the visible action while the other controls the setting. The pattern is old in its logic, even if the objects are new. In the long history of human origins, making and using tools also connected one body to another. A young learner could watch where an older person placed the core, how the striking hand approached, when the wrist stopped, and how the object was turned after each attempt. This visible order may have helped movements pass from person to person. A shared preference would make imitation easier, because bodies facing the same material would begin from similar directions. Yet the evidence must remain modest. A stone tool does not always tell us with certainty which hand made it. Many tools were moved, reused, damaged, or shaped by several actions. Some makers may have worked differently from the majority. The safe idea is not that every ancient tool proves right-handedness. It is that tool-making gives us a place where brain, hand, eye, strength, and learning met one another repeatedly, and where a small side preference could become part of the ancient working rhythm of being human. In that rhythm, the hand was never alone. It belonged to a whole body trying to make matter answer. To call one hand dominant can hide the work of the other hand. In a right-handed action, the right side often receives the name because it performs the visible change. It swings the hammerstone, guides the edge, draws the mark, or turns the tool. But many actions would fail without the quieter side. The other hand fixes the problem in place. It creates resistance. It gives the moving hand something stable to meet. In this sense, right-handedness is not simply a story of one side doing more. It is a story of two sides becoming specialized enough that one is noticed and the other is taken for granted. This distinction is important for the ancient question, because early tool use was rarely a clean solo movement. A stone core had to be held at a useful angle. A strip of material had to be pulled tight. Food had to be steadied before it could be cut. A wooden shaft, a fibre cord, a hide surface, or a broken edge had to be controlled before it could be changed. The acting hand may have delivered the clearer motion, but the holding hand created the conditions for that motion to succeed. If the right hand became the more common acting hand in many human groups, the left hand did not disappear from skill. It became the hidden ground of skill. This older arrangement still lives in modern bodies. When someone writes, the non-writing hand often holds the page. When someone cuts bread, the non-cutting hand keeps the bread from moving. When someone threads a needle, opens a jar, ties a knot, or uses a phone, the two hands divide the world into movement and support. We often name the moving side because our attention follows motion. Yet the origin of the pattern may be better understood as cooperation, not victory. In deep human time, Cooperation inside the body would have joined cooperation between people. A young learner watching a skilled adult shape stone or prepare material would see a whole posture, not just a hand. The learner would see which side held the object, which side struck, where the eyes rested, how the shoulders turned, and how the next attempt was prepared after the last one failed. Knowledge moved through bodies before it could be stored in writing. A repeated side pattern, once common, could make imitation easier. If most people in a group approached a task from similar directions, the learner's body had a clearer model to follow. That does not mean everyone copied perfectly, or that left-handed makers were absent. It only means a shared majority tendency could settle into the everyday flow of work. This may help explain why handedness is tied so closely to tools, but cannot be reduced to tools alone. A tool does not create a hand preference from nothing. It gives preference a place to become useful, visible, and teachable. Biology may offer the small leaning. Repetition may deepen it. Social learning may spread it. Material culture may then preserve it in objects shaped for the common hand. Over many generations, the circle could become difficult to separate into cause and effect. The right hand might feel natural because the nervous system prepared it, because practice strengthened it, because older people demonstrated it, and because the tools around the child quietly expected it. Each layer returns to the body. The ancient split hidden in our bones is therefore not only a mark of force, it is a mark of coordinated roles. One side changes, one side steadies, and together they make skill possible. In the long beginning of our species, such skill may have helped ordinary actions become reliable enough to be learned, repeated, and passed forward without anyone needing to name the process. What remained was not a command, but a familiar direction carried by hands, eyes, shoulders, and memory through many slow generations. When a skill is learned by watching, the side of the body becomes part of the lesson even when no one names it. A child does not only see that a stone edge can be made, or that a strip of material can be cut, or that food can be prepared. The child sees where the object is held, which hand moves, how the shoulders turn, how close the work is brought to the eyes, and how the body corrects itself after a mistake. Much of early human learning must have depended on this kind of attention. We should not imagine formal classrooms long ago, or teachers explaining hand preference as a rule. It is enough to imagine repeated work where younger bodies could see older bodies act. In that setting, a common direction could become easier to copy because it was visible again and again. If most skilled adults in a group used the right hand for the more active movement, then a young learner surrounded by them would receive the same pattern many times. The left hand would appear as the holder, the bracer, the patient side that keeps the object still. The right hand would appear as the striker, cutter, marker, or guide. Over time, imitation would not only pass along a finished tool, it would pass along a posture, a rhythm, and a way of beginning. This is one reason handedness belongs to both biology and culture without being fully owned by either one. A nervous system may make one direction more likely. Practice may make that direction more confident. The group may make it easier to observe. The tool may be shaped by the repeated needs of the common hand. Then the child grows inside a world where the same arrangement feels prepared. Such a process does not need a central decision. No one has to gather a group and decide that the right hand should lead. A majority can form slowly through usefulness, copying, and the way repeated movements leave expectations behind. Human origins were built from these small continuities. A flake struck from stone, a piece of food held steady, an object passed from one body to another, a gesture used to show where force should fall. Each could help direction become familiar. Still, the pattern should not be made too strict. Some ancient makers may have been left-handed. Some may have changed hands depending on task. Some may have used both hands beyond modern labels. The evidence cannot restore every individual, but the persistence of a broad right-side preference suggests that something more than chance was at work. It suggests that the human body, once placed inside skilled social life, could amplify a small leaning into a shared habit. The remarkable thing is how quiet this amplification would have been. It would not feel like history to the people living it. It would feel like doing the task the way it is done. That is how many old patterns survive. They enter the hands before they enter speech. They become part of the room, the tool, the gesture, and the expectation of the learner. In the modern world, we still see the same principle when a child learns to write by watching a hand move across a page, or learns to use scissors, chop food, throw a ball, or hold a phone. The objects are new, but the method is old. Attention follows movement. Movement becomes practice. Practice becomes ease. The ancient split hidden in our bones may therefore have been strengthened not by one dramatic advantage, but by a long chain of visible acts. One body showed another how to begin. One generation left behind habits in tools and gestures. The next generation entered those habits as if entering a landscape. Somewhere in that landscape, the right hand became the common path, and the left hand remained the alternative. A child does not begin life by studying history, yet the body begins learning direction almost at once. A small hand opens, closes, brushes against cloth, touches skin, reaches toward a face, and slowly discovers that the world can be brought closer. At first, the movement may look uncertain. The arm overshoots, the fingers miss the object, the grip is too loose or too strong. Nothing about this early reaching looks like the calm certainty of an adult hand lifting a cup. But through repetition, the body begins to sort itself. One side may reach a little more often. One hand may become steadier when food is brought toward the mouth. One arm may guide a toy, a spoon, a pencil, or a thrown object with growing confidence. The child does not know that most people are right-handed. The child does not know that bones, tools, teeth, and ancient movements may carry traces of an older human pattern. Yet the same question is quietly returning inside an ordinary room. How does a human body, born with two capable hands, begin to favour one path over the other? The answer is not as simple as saying that the child is taught, or that the child is programmed. Development is slower and more layered than that. The nervous system matures while the body moves. Vision improves while the hands practice. Balance changes as sitting, crawling, standing, and walking alter the relationship between the arms and the world. Caregivers place objects within reach. Rooms contain objects already shaped by a mostly right-handed world. Other people demonstrate actions without meaning to teach handedness at all. A spoon is held. A door is opened. A page is turned. A hand waves, points, cuts, wipes, draws, and gives. The child watches before understanding. This is close, in a small modern way, to an ancient form of learning. Near the beginning of human life, young bodies also had to learn from bodies around them. They did not inherit finished skill in the way they inherited bones. They had to grow into movement. They had to watch how food was handled, how objects were carried, how edges were used, how material was held still, and how gestures guided attention. The modern child is not repeating a prehistoric scene, and we should not pretend that a nursery can reveal ancient camps in detail. But the principle is continuous. Human beings learn with their bodies before they can fully explain what they are learning. Hand preference emerges from that bodily education. It may appear first as a tendency, then as comfort, then as expectation. Once the right hand has succeeded many times, the body may return to it more readily. Success does not have to be dramatic. It can be the spoon reaching the mouth, the block placed on top of another block, the crayon leaving a mark, the ball thrown forward, the small object picked up without falling. Each success strengthens a root. The other hand remains active, often helping in quieter ways, but the leading side gathers familiarity. That familiarity is not only inside the muscles, it settles into attention, into timing, into the calm feeling that one path begins more easily than the other. In a world where adults, tools, furniture, and simple demonstrations often favour the right, that familiarity can deepen. Still, some children grow toward the left hand, and that fact is essential. It shows that the human pattern is strong, not absolute. A rare direction is not a mistake in the body. It is part of the range that human development preserves. The ancient split hidden in our bones therefore returns in childhood not as a fixed command, but as a slow unfolding, where biology, practice, imitation, and surroundings meet in the first years of a human life. It would be easy to tell a child's story as if one force were in charge. Some people say handedness is in the genes. Others imagine it as a lesson pressed onto the body by parents, teachers, tools, and rules. Neither explanation is enough on its own. A human child grows at the meeting point of inheritance and experience. The body arrives with a nervous system already shaped by long evolutionary history, but that system is unfinished in many important ways. It must grow through movement. It must test distance, weight, texture, balance, and timing. It must learn what happens when a hand reaches and succeeds, or reaches and fails. Over months and years, small tendencies may become clearer, not because one moment decides everything, but because thousands of ordinary acts lean the body in a direction. This is why right-handedness should not be described as purely genetic or purely cultural. Genes can influence brain development, body organization, and the likelihood of certain patterns, but no single simple instruction writes the full story. Culture can encourage one side, sometimes strongly, but it does not create every movement from outside the child. Between these two explanations is the living process of development. A child is born into a body, and also into a world. The body has two hands. The world offers objects. The people nearby demonstrate what can be done with them. The nervous system gradually connects intention with action. Near the beginning of human life, long before written records and formal schools, young bodies would also have entered this same meeting point. They inherited bodies shaped by earlier evolution, but they still had to learn how to use those bodies in a particular place, among particular people, with particular materials. A hand preference could become part of that learning without anyone naming it. The right hand might begin with a slight readiness. Repetition might make it more useful. Watching others might make it more expected. The left hand might become the steady partner that holds, supports, and prepares. Or, in some children, the pattern might unfold differently, and the left hand might become the leading side. That possibility matters because it keeps the explanation honest. Human development is patterned, but not identical. If handedness were only a command in the body, there would be little room for variation. If it were only social pressure, the deep and broad tendency toward the right side would be harder to explain. The safer truth is that many layers appear to work together. The brain's two hemispheres develop with certain differences. The muscles and joints strengthen through use. The eyes and hands learn to coordinate. Caregivers and older children provide examples. Objects are often shaped for the majority. Later, customs and schools may add their own pressure. Each layer can make the next layer feel more natural. A child who already reaches more often with the right hand may find the surrounding world ready for that choice. A child who reaches more often with the left may still learn skill, but may notice that some objects, gestures, and expectations do not fit as quietly. This is not a story of better and worse bodies. It is a story of how a majority pattern becomes an environment. In the long history of human origins, the same principle may have operated more simply, but not less powerfully. Tools, food, carrying, cutting, scraping, pointing, and sharing all gave young bodies chances to practice a side. Repeated practice gave the side a history. Across generations, that history became easier to inherit as behavior, even when it was not inherited as a fixed rule. The ancient split hidden in our bones may therefore pass through childhood as a gentle tension between what the body brings and what the world asks. It is neither fate alone nor training alone, but a slow conversation between an old nervous system and a new life learning how to reach. Every child who learns a hand preference begins with a body that is new, but not empty. The nervous system has a long ancestry behind it, even though the child has no memory of that ancestry. The first reach toward a spoon, a toy, a face, or a falling object is not a direct window into prehistory, yet it carries the same basic human problem. How does a body with two sides organize action in the world? One hand may begin to move with more confidence. The other may help by holding, balancing, or waiting close by. The child does not understand that this small difference belongs to a much larger pattern. Still, the pattern begins to feel personal. A preferred hand becomes the hand of success. It is the hand that feeds more cleanly, draws more steadily, throws with more aim, and returns again because it has worked before. In this way, a modern child quietly shows how an old humoral tendency can renew itself without being consciously remembered. The origin is not replayed in detail. No child today is living the same life as early humans. The rooms, Objects, foods, dangers, and customs are different. But the deeper principle remains. Bodies learn by doing. Skill grows through repeated correction. A movement that succeeds becomes easier to choose again. This is why childhood matters so much for the question of right-handedness. It brings the ancient issue back into living time. What may once have been shaped by stone, wood, food, carrying, and shared work is now shaped by spoons, pencils, cups, doors, screens, toys, and the hands of other people nearby. The materials have changed, but the body still has to divide labour between its two sides. One hand may hold the paper while the other makes a mark. One hand may steady a bowl while the other lifts food. One hand may support the body while the other reaches outward. These small divisions teach the nervous system where ease lives. They also show how a majority pattern can become gentle and powerful at the same time. If most adults around a child are right-handed, the child sees right-handed action everywhere. It appears in the way tools are passed, the way writing is demonstrated, the way a lid is opened, the way a ball is thrown, the way work is shown without words. This does not force every child into the same shape. Left-handed children still appear, and many become deeply skilled in a world not always arranged for them. But the surrounding pattern gives the right hand a quieter welcome. It makes the common path easier to enter. Near the beginning of human history, a similar welcome may have existed in simpler forms. A young learner surrounded by right-leading gestures in tool use, food preparation, carrying, or making would have entered a world of repeated directions. The child's body would bring its own tendencies, but the visible world would answer some tendencies more easily than others. Across many generations, this meeting of body and surroundings could strengthen the same side again and again. The ancient split hidden in our bones is not only something buried in fossils, it is also something renewed whenever a human body grows into skill. A child reaching today is not remembering ancient hands, yet the child is using a body shaped by the long story those hands helped create. That is the quiet bridge between prehistory and the present. The past does not need to speak aloud to remain active. It can remain in timing, comfort, imitation, and the familiar feeling that one side knows the way before the mind has fully asked the question. The survival of left-handedness is as important as the dominance of the right hand. If the human body had truly settled the question once and for all, the rarer side might have vanished from the story. But it did not. In every generation, some people still reach, write, cut, throw, and guide the world, mainly with the left hand. Their presence interrupts any simple explanation. It tells us that the right-handed majority is strong, but not absolute. It also reminds us that biology does not always remove what is uncommon. A trait can remain rare without being an error. A minority pattern can persist if it does not prevent survival and reproduction, if it appears again through development, or if it carries small advantages in some situations without becoming the usual path for everyone. This needs to be said carefully. Left-handed people should not be turned into myths, either as unusually gifted or as somehow deficient. The honest point is quieter. Human variation is real, and handedness belongs to that variation. The ancient split hidden in our bones is not a wall separating two kinds of people. It is a broad leaning in one direction, with a steady opening left for another. This matters deeply for human origins because early populations were never perfect copies of a single pattern. They were made of individuals, families, children, injuries, habits, bodies, and local tasks. Some bodies may have found the right side easier. Some may have found the left side easier. Some may have shifted with the task. Some may have used both hands in ways that modern labels would not fully capture. If most skilled actions leaned right, that would shape learning and tools, but it would not erase every other possibility. A left-handed person in an ancient group would still need to hold, carry, cut, scrape, gather, gesture, and learn. The body would still divide labour between two sides. The difference would be which side more often led the visible action. In some shared tasks, being rare could even change how another person responded, especially in actions involving timing, surprise, or opposition. Researchers sometimes discuss this kind of possibility in relation to the persistence of left-handedness, but it should not be exaggerated into a simple explanation. Human life is wider than combat, competition, or advantage. Many daily tasks are cooperative, quiet, and repetitive. Food must be prepared, Materials must be held. Children must be carried. Tools must be learned. A rare hand preference may remain simply because it fits within the range of viable human development. The fact that left-handedness survived also helps protect the story of right-handedness from becoming too rigid. If handedness came only from strict teaching, the rare pattern might be expected to disappear wherever pressure was strong. If it came only from one direct biological command, variation would be harder to explain. The continuing presence of the left hand suggests a more layered process. Genes, brain development, prenatal conditions, childhood practice, imitation and cultural expectations may all contribute, but none acts like a single ruler. Near the beginning of our species, the same layered process may have allowed a majority direction to grow while preserving individual difference. The right hand became common enough to shape the human-made world, but the left hand remained common enough to show that the species never became uniform. In that quiet range, the ancient body remains visible, not as a perfect plan, but as a living field of possible directions within it. That is the value of the minority in this story. It keeps the question open. It shows that the body carries tendencies, not guarantees. It reminds us that evolution often works with ranges, not perfect categories. The left hand did not disappear because human beings were never a single repeated design. They were a population, and a population can lean strongly one way while still keeping many paths alive. A rare pattern is not automatically a broken pattern. In living populations, uncommon traits can remain for a long time without needing to be explained as mistakes. They may be neutral in many situations, slightly costly in some, helpful in others, or simply produced again by the way development works. Left-handedness belongs in this careful space. It is less common, but it is not a defect in the human body. It is one of the ways the body can organize movement, attention, and skill. This point matters because the story of right-handedness has often been told too narrowly, as if the majority hand were normal and the minority hand were a problem to solve. A more truthful view is slower. The right-handed majority shows a strong tendency in our species. The left-handed minority shows that the tendency never became a law. Between them is the actual human pattern, stable, uneven, and still open to variation. In deep human time, that variation would have lived inside ordinary tasks, not inside labels. A left-handed person did not need to be called unusual in order to use the left hand. The body simply moved from the side that felt more reliable. One hand held, the other acted. One hand steadied, the other changed the material. The direction could differ while the deeper cooperation remained the same. If a group contained mostly right-leading bodies and a few left-leading bodies, the shared work would still continue. Food could still be prepared. Tools could still be made. Children could still learn by watching more than one kind of movement. The rare direction might create small differences in imitation or tool handling, but it would not necessarily threaten survival. That alone may be enough to understand part of its persistence. Biology does not erase every minority pattern simply because it is uncommon. It keeps many forms if they remain workable within life. Some researchers have suggested that rarity itself can sometimes matter, especially in situations where an unexpected movement may give a small advantage, such as direct competition or face-to-face conflict. This idea should be handled gently. It may help explain why left-handedness did not vanish, but it cannot carry the whole explanation. Human beings are not shaped only by contests. Much of human life is cooperative, repetitive, and domestic in the broadest sense of the word. It is the work of carrying, feeding, making, teaching, caring, repairing, and living near others. In those settings, left-handedness may persist not because it is secretly superior, but because it fits within the flexible range of human bodies. A left-handed child can learn skill. A left-handed adult can perform precise work. A left-handed maker can adapt to tools or reshape the way a tool is held. The cost of being rare may appear in objects and expectations, especially in later societies built around the right hand, but rarity alone is not disappearance. The ancient split hidden in our bones is therefore a split with movement still inside it. It is not a closed door. It is a leaning path with side paths remaining. Near the beginning of our species, this would have mattered across generations. If most young bodies saw right-handed actions, the right side could become easier to learn as the common model. But left-handed children would still arise, because development is not a copy machine. brain organization, inherited tendencies, prenatal growth, early movement, and surrounding practice may combine in different ways. The result is a population, not a row of identical bodies. That is why the persistence of left-handedness is so valuable to the question. It keeps the story honest. It tells us that the human body carries old pressures, but also old freedoms. The majority hand may show the direction most bodies took, while the minority hand shows that evolution did not remove every alternative. In that quiet coexistence, we can see one deep lesson of human biology. To be uncommon is not to be wrong. The left hand has often been surrounded by stories that say too much. In some times and places it has been treated as awkward, unlucky, suspicious, gifted, rebellious, or mysterious. Those stories reveal more about culture than about the hand itself. A left-handed person is not a sign that the human pattern failed, and not proof of a hidden power that science has overlooked. The safer truth is calmer. The human body allows more than one direction of skill. Most people lean right, some lean left, and many people carry smaller mixtures that ordinary labels do not notice. This range is not a flaw in the species. It is one of the ways a living population stays real. If every body were forced into one exact pattern, the story would be easier to tell, but less true. The ancient question is not why the rare side is strange. It is why the common side became so common, while the rare side remained possible. That balance between strong tendency and lasting variation may be one of the most human things in the whole subject. Near the beginning of our species, no one needed a word for left-handedness in order for left-handed bodies to exist. A person who favored the left would still carry food, shape materials, comfort children, point, gesture, throw, scrape, and learn. The person would still use both hands, because no human hand lives alone. The leading side might differ, but the deeper need for cooperation between the two sides would remain. This helps remove the temptation to turn left-handedness into a myth. It was not likely a separate kind of humanity. It was a different route through the same bodily problem: how to make action reliable in a world of objects, tasks, and other people. In later history, culture often made that route harder. When tools, writing habits, ritual gestures, and classroom expectations favored the right hand, left-handed people could be pressured to change or made to feel that their natural movement was wrong. That social pressure is real, but it should not be confused with biology itself. The body's variation existed before many of those rules, and it continued after them. A person may adapt to a right-handed world, but adaptation is not disappearance. The left hand survived because human development kept allowing it to appear, and because the body can learn skill from more than one side. This survival gives the entire story a more honest shape. The right hand became the common path, but common does not mean complete. The left hand remained as a quiet reminder that human evolution does not produce identical lives. It works through populations, through families, through children growing differently, through nervous systems that share broad patterns but never repeat themselves perfectly. Near human origins, such variation would have been present in every camp, every generation, and every small learning circle where younger bodies watched older ones. Some movements would have been easier to imitate if they matched the majority. Others would have required adjustment, but adjustment is part of human life. A left-handed learner might turn the body differently, hold material at another angle, or find a slightly different rhythm for the same task. The shared goal could remain, even when the path of the hands changed. Our species survived not because every body moved in the same way, but because different bodies could still join shared work. That is the value of left-handedness in this story. It prevents the right-handed majority from becoming a false claim of perfection. It keeps the question open, gentle, and accurate. The split hidden in our bones is not a ranking of hands. It is a memory of asymmetry, usefulness, learning, and variation carried together. One side became more common. The other did not vanish. Between them, the human body shows a truth older than writing. Nature often builds a strong pattern, then leaves enough room for difference to breathe. Once a majority becomes large enough, it begins to shape the world around it. A hand preference that begins inside bodies does not stay inside bodies forever. It enters wood, stone, cloth, metal, writing surfaces, doorways, weapons, tools, manners, and habits of teaching. If most people use the right hand for the more active movement, then objects made by those people often begin to fit that movement without anyone needing to discuss it. A handle may be easier to grasp from one side. A blade may be sharpened or angled for the common grip. A shield and weapon may be practiced in a familiar arrangement. A loom, a needle, a carving tool, a bowl, a ladle, a latch, or a writing instrument may settle into forms that feel natural to the many and slightly awkward to the few. Culture does not need to invent right-handedness from nothing in order to strengthen it. It can take a biological tendency and turn it into a material environment. That is where the ancient split hidden in our bones begins to move outward into the human-made world. The right hand becomes not only a bodily preference, but a quiet expectation built into objects. This matters because human beings do not grow in empty space. A child is born into rooms, tools, gestures, and demonstrations already shaped by earlier generations. The child learns where the hand should go by watching others and by touching objects that answer one side more easily. In later history, writing made this especially visible. Many writing systems, tools, and classroom habits were shaped in worlds where right-handed use was treated as ordinary. The hand that moved across a surface became tied to discipline, education, record-keeping, and social approval. But the cultural story begins far earlier than schools. Near the beginning of human life, whenever one person showed another how to make, carry, cut, scrape, bind, or prepare something, the side of the body was already present in the lesson. Repeated gestures became repeated expectations. Repeated expectations became shared technique. Shared technique slowly shaped objects. Objects then return the pattern to the next learner. This circle can make a majority feel like nature, even when it is partly built by culture. Ritual and manners may have added another layer. In many societies, the right hand became associated with offering, greeting, eating, oath-taking, blessing, authority, or proper conduct, while the left hand sometimes took on less favoured meanings. These customs varied across places and times, and they should not be treated as one universal rule, but they show how a bodily majority can become symbolic. A side that is common in action can become common in meaning. Once meaning is attached, pressure can follow. A left-handed child may be corrected. A worker may be expected to use a tool in the common way. A gesture may be judged by the side that performs it. The body's unevenness becomes social unevenness. Yet culture, even when strong, does not erase the older question. If right-handedness were only a rule imposed by society, it would be easier to imagine it changing as quickly as customs change. But the pattern appears deeper and broader than recent manners alone. The safer view is that culture amplified a tendency already present in human bodies and perhaps already visible in ancient material traces. Over long time, the two forces would not stand apart. Biology would guide movement. Movement would shape practice. Practice would shape objects. Objects would shape learning. Learning would return to the body as ease. The right hand became common in the body, then common in the world, and finally common in the feeling of what is normal. The left hand remained capable, but often had to meet a world arranged by the other side. That quiet mismatch is one of the most ordinary consequences of being in the minority. It does not make the minority wrong. It reveals how deeply the majority can enter the environment. Human history is full of such hidden arrangements, where a repeated bodily pattern becomes furniture, etiquette, craft, and law. In the case of handedness, the result is intimate. The world touches the hand every day, and the hand touches a world already shaped by ancient hands before it. Culture can magnify a small bodily leaning until it feels like the shape of reality. A child who is born into a mostly right-handed community does not meet handedness only as a private tendency. The child meets it in the angle of tools, in the way adults pass objects, in the direction of writing, in the layout of work, and in the quiet corrections that say one movement is easier, cleaner, or more proper than another. This is how culture can amplify biology. It does not need to invent the leaning. It only has to receive it, repeat it, and build around it. A preference that may begin in the nervous system, practice, and early development becomes furniture, craft, teaching, and expectation. The hand then returns to the world and finds the world already prepared for it. That circle is powerful because it hides itself. The right hand feels natural not only because the body may be ready to use it, but because so many objects answer it kindly. The door opens without resistance. The tool rests in the palm at the expected angle. The teacher's demonstration is easy to mirror. The written line does not smudge under the moving hand in some systems. The common body and the common world fit each other so closely that the fit becomes invisible. Near the beginning of human history, the same principle may have worked in simpler materials. A stone core passed from one person to another, a cutting movement shown beside a fire, a knot tied in fibre, a hide held tight, a child watching how an older person steadied and struck. These were not formal institutions, yet they were cultural transmission. They carried not only what to do, but how the body began doing it. When many people began from the same side, the learner entered a landscape of repeated direction. Over generations, that landscape could deepen a biological tendency without anyone designing it. The body leaned, the group repeated, the objects adjusted, and the next body learned inside the result. Later societies made the circle more visible and sometimes more forceful. Schools could reward one side, crafts could assume one grip. Religious or social gestures could attach value to one hand and suspicion or discomfort to the other. Workplaces could make tools for the majority because that was practical for production. None of these later pressures should be mistaken for the whole origin of handedness, but they show how a broad tendency becomes social structure. The left-handed person then lives not merely with a different preference, but with a world that often asks for translation. A tool may need to be turned, a motion may need to be reversed, a desk may fit poorly, a lesson may be demonstrated from the opposite side. These frictions are usually small, but they reveal something large. Culture can make the majority feel effortless and the minority feel noticeable. The ancient split hidden in our bones is therefore also hidden in human surroundings. It is in handles, marks, habits, and silent assumptions. Yet the story remains a circle, not a straight line. Biology does not stand at one end and culture at the other. The two meet in every child who reaches for an object made by earlier hands. A nervous system prepares movement, a hand practices, a community shows, a tool responds, a custom praises or corrects. Then the next generation begins again. If most people are right-handed, the world made by those people will tend to welcome the right hand, and that welcome can make the original tendency feel even older, deeper, and more certain than it truly is. What began as movement becomes environment. What becomes environment becomes memory without words, carried quietly from hand to hand. And in that quiet exchange, human origins remain close to the present, not as a solved secret, but as a pressure felt whenever the hand meets a shaped world. Culture can make the right hand feel obvious, but culture alone cannot carry the whole weight of the question. If handedness were only a custom taught by families, schools, or rulers, then the pattern would likely bend more sharply with language, law, religion, and local tradition. Some societies might strongly favour one side, others might favour the other, and some might keep the two nearly balanced. Human customs can change quickly when compared with deep biological time. Clothing changes, tools change, writing systems change, manners change. A rule that feels fixed in one century can seem strange in another, yet the broad right-handed tendency appears across many human communities, including places with very different histories. That does not mean every culture has treated the right and left hands in the same way. It means the underlying leaning seems too wide and too old to be explained only by recent instruction. Culture can press, reward, punish, and shape behavior, but it may be pressing on a tendency that was already present before formal teaching gave it names. This is where the question returns to human origins. Long before schools corrected children, before books fixed writing habits, before standardized tools were made for mass use, bodies were already reaching, holding, cutting, scraping, carrying, throwing, and learning from other bodies. If ancient evidence hints at repeated side use in teeth, bones, or tools, then the right-handed majority cannot be placed entirely inside recent social rules. The record is incomplete, and it should never be forced into a stronger claim than it can support. Still, the old traces matter, because they show that the human split may have roots in practical life, not only in symbolic meaning. A person making a tool, steadying food, or showing a movement to a child was not obeying a classroom rule. The body was solving a task. Over time, many such solutions could lean in the same direction. Later culture may have taken that leaning and made it more visible, more rigid, and more difficult for the minority, but the leaning itself likely belongs to a longer conversation between nervous system, posture, hand skill, imitation, and shared work. To say this carefully is important. Culture is not weak in the story. It is powerful because it turns repeated behavior into surroundings. It builds desks, handles, blades, scripts, gestures, machines, and expectations. It can make the left-handed person feel out of place even when the body is fully capable. It can make the right-handed person mistake comfort for proof that the world was always meant to fit them. But culture is also a receiver. It receives bodies that already come with tendencies. It receives children who begin to prefer one side before they understand social meaning. It receives communities where skilled action is watched and copied. Near the beginning of our species, that receiving and repeating may have been quiet, practical, and intimate. A movement was shown. A child tried it. An object was shaped. A habit returned. Nothing in that chain needed to be written down. The evidence for handedness therefore sits between two errors. One error is to claim that biology alone decided everything. The other is to claim that culture simply invented the right-hand majority. A more honest picture is slower. The body leans. The task strengthens the lean. The group repeats it. Objects are shaped around it. Meanings gather around the objects and gestures. Then the next generation enters a world where the old leaning feels like common sense. This circle helps explain why the pattern can feel ancient and social at the same time. The ancient split hidden in our bones is also hidden in the things humans made, and in the way those things taught later hands where ease was expected to be. The right hand became common not as a single decree, but as a long accumulation of readiness, practice, visibility, and design. The left hand remained, not as an error against the pattern, but as the evidence that the pattern never closed completely. The connection between hand preference and language is one of the most tempting parts of the story, and also one of the places where caution matters most. In many right-handed people, the left hemisphere of the brain is strongly involved in language, and that same hemisphere is also closely involved in controlling skilled movement of the right hand. This overlap invites a powerful idea. Perhaps the hand that became common and the voice that became human grew from related forms of brain organization. But an invitation is not the same as a conclusion. The brain is not a simple machine with one side for words and one side for silence. Language is distributed through networks. Movement is distributed through networks. Gesture, attention, memory, hearing, planning, and social understanding all join the act of communication. A person speaking does not use only the mouth. The eyes move, the face changes, the hands often rise, the body points, offers, refuses, counts, measures, warns, and welcomes. In that wider sense, the right hand is part of a larger human system of expression, but it should not be mistaken for the cause of speech itself. Near the beginning of our species, communication almost certainly involved more than spoken words as modern people use them. The exact forms are uncertain, and they should not be invented with false confidence. But living humans show that gesture and speech work closely together. People point before they explain. They shape space with their hands while telling a story. They show size, direction, danger, ownership, invitation, and refusal through movement. A hand can make attention visible. It can turn another person's eyes toward food, a path, a tool, a child, a threat, or a shared task. For early humans, who lived by cooperation and learning, this kind of visible attention may have mattered deeply. If one side of the body more often carried precise action, that side may also have become common in demonstration. A toolmaker showing where to strike, a gatherer showing how to pull, a caregiver guiding a child's hand, or a companion pointing toward movement in the distance, would all be using the body as part of communication. These examples are not meant as reconstructed scenes. but as careful reminders that hands and language belong to the same social animal. The evidence, however, remains delicate. Fossils can show skull shape, teeth, bones, and sometimes traces of tool use, but they do not preserve voices. They do not preserve the first jokes, warnings, names, songs, or gestures. Archaeology can reveal objects and marks, not the full conversation around them. For this reason, it would be misleading to say that right-handedness proves language, or that language created right-handedness. The safer idea is that both may be connected through the broader asymmetry of the human brain and the repeated need for skilled, shared action. Hand preference, tool use, gesture, and communication may have developed alongside one another, each giving the others more room to grow. A common right hand could make demonstrations easier to follow. Shared gestures could strengthen the visible side of action. Language could later attach meaning to movements already familiar in the group. Over generations, the hand that worked, pointed, and showed may have become part of the way knowledge moved between bodies. The ancient split hidden in our bones is therefore not only a matter of strength or tool use. It may also touch the quiet border between action and meaning, where a movement of the hand becomes a signal to another mind, and where the body begins to speak before speech has fully arrived. In that border, the right hand should not be glorified, and the left hand should not be forgotten. Both sides helped human beings act together. The question is why one side became the more common visible messenger, while the other continued to steady the world quietly from close beside it. Hand skill, gesture, and communication may have grown near one another because they all depend on ordered movement. A hand that shapes stone must plan a sequence. A hand that points must direct another person's attention. A mouth that speaks must control breath, timing, tongue, lips, sound, and meaning. These are not the same abilities, and one should not be collapsed into another. But they share a deeper requirement. The body must prepare an action, perform it in the right moment, and adjust it according to what happens next. In the human brain, such preparation is not spread evenly. Some networks become more specialized than others. Some actions become easier from one side. Some signals become clearer through familiar pathways. This does not prove that right-handedness caused language, or that language caused right-handedness. It suggests something more careful. The same broad movement toward organized asymmetry may have helped hands, tools, gestures, and communication develop in conversation with each other. Near the beginning of human life, a useful movement did not belong only to the person making it. It could be watched, it could be copied, it could become a sign of what should happen next. A hand lifted toward a direction could guide the eyes of another body. A hand placed on a tool could show where force should fall. A slow demonstration could turn private skill into shared learning. Such actions are not language, but they sit close to the roots of communication because they make intention visible. The ancient human body learned not only to act on objects, but to act in front of others. Tool-making becomes more powerful when one body can help another body understand a sequence. Gathering, carrying, preparing food, caring for children, and working near danger all become safer when attention can be guided. If one side of the body was more often used for precise action, that side may also have become more common in demonstration. The right hand may have been visible not only as the hand that changed material, but as the hand that showed how material could be changed. Still, the left hand remained inside the message. It held the object, supported the gesture, balanced the posture, and often gave the moving hand a stable world to speak against. This is why the question should stay wider than a single hand. The real subject is coordination. A person making a tool, teaching a motion, or pointing towards something important uses eyes, shoulders, hands, face, breath, memory, and shared attention together. The brain must connect perception with action, and action with another person's response. In that wide system, handedness may be one visible trace of a deeper pattern of lateralized control. It may show that human bodies often organize complex behavior by allowing one side to lead certain tasks while the other side supports them. The same principle may have helped speech and gesture work together, not as separate inventions, but as neighboring forms of communication growing around a social body. No fossil can preserve the first careful gesture. No stone tool can preserve the exact look exchange between learner and maker. but the material record does show that human ancestors became dependent on learned skill, and learned skill requires more than hands alone. It requires a body able to repeat, observe, correct, and share. Over long time, a common side for action could have made some demonstrations easier to follow, especially if many people in a group use similar postures and movements. This would not erase left-handedness, and it would not make the right hand superior. It would simply make one direction more common in the visible language of work. The ancient split hidden in our bones may therefore belong to the slow joining of action and meaning, where a hand does not merely touch the world, but helps another mind see how the world can be touched at all. Perhaps the safest way to think about handedness and language is to imagine them as neighbours, not as parent and child. One did not simply give birth to the other in a clean line. The human body is rarely built by clean lines. It is built by overlapping needs. A hand must reach at the right time. A tool must be held at the right angle. A gesture must be visible to another person. A spoken sound must arrive with timing, attention, and shared meaning. These abilities are different, yet they all ask the nervous system to organize action across the body. If the right hand became the more common side for skilled movement, and if the left hemisphere of the brain was often deeply involved in both language and fine motor control, then the two patterns may have grown close to each other in the long development of our species. But closeness is not certainty. It would be careless to say that right-handedness created speech, or that speech forced the right hand into dominance. The more honest view is quieter. Handedness, gesture, tool use, and language may all belong to a broader human tendency toward organized asymmetry. Near the beginning of human life, before written records and before formal teaching, meaning had to pass through bodies. A person could show where to strike, where to look, where to wait, where to carry, where danger might be, or how a task should begin. A hand moving through space could become a bridge between one mind and another. It could make attention travel. It could turn a private intention into something visible. Later, speech would allow meaning to become more flexible, but speech did not make the body disappear. Even now, when people talk, their hands often continue the sentence in the air. They measure, point, shape, count, refuse, invite, and emphasize. The body keeps speaking beside the voice. This modern fact should not be projected backward too strongly, but it offers a gentle clue. Human communication is not only sound, it is coordinated action shared between people. In that shared action, a common leading hand could have mattered without being the single cause of anything. If many people demonstrated work from the same side, learners could follow more easily. If many gestures began from the same side, shared attention may have become more predictable. If skilled action and social meaning grew together, then the common right hand may have become part of the visible rhythm of human learning. Still, the left hand remained part of the same system. It held, balanced, received, carried, and sometimes led. Its quieter role does not make it less human. It reminds us that communication is not only the movement that catches the eye, but also the support that allows movement to make sense. The ancient split hidden in our bones may therefore be a companion to language, not its origin and not its proof. It may be one of the many signs that the human brain became specialized enough to coordinate complex action, yet flexible enough to preserve variation. This balance between specialization and variation is important. Too much symmetry might make skilled roles less stable. Too much rigidity might erase useful difference. Human beings seem to live between those extremes. Most bodies lean toward the right hand. Many brains organize language strongly to one side, and yet not every person follows the same pattern. The question remains open because the evidence is open. Fossils cannot tell us when a gesture first became a word. Tools cannot tell us when a sound first carried a remembered name. Bones cannot tell us how a learner felt while watching an older hand move. But together, they suggest a patient possibility. The same long history that made human hands skilled also made human communication bodily, social, and shared. The right hand may have been one common path through that history, while the left hand kept another path alive. History did not begin the preference for the right hand, but history gave it walls, tools, customs, and institutions. Once human groups became larger, more settled, and more dependent on shared systems of work, the common hand became more than a personal habit. It became part of the way daily life was organized. In farming communities, hands worked soil, seed, grain, baskets, ropes, handles, blades, and animals. In craft traditions, hands shaped clay, polished stone, spun fiber, carved wood, hammered metal, prepared food, and passed techniques from older workers to younger ones. In writing cultures, the moving hand became tied to memory, law, trade, religion, and power. When most people used the right hand for the visible action, the right hand quietly became the default body assumed by the world. This did not happen in the same way everywhere. Human societies have always been different in their tools, symbols, and rules, but the larger tendency is clear enough to think about carefully. A biological and developmental leaning can become a historical arrangement. The right hand was no longer only the hand that reached first. It became the hand expected in teaching, making, greeting, recording, and sometimes obeying. This is where the ancient split hidden in our bones entered the open history of civilization. What began as movement could become custom. What became custom could become pressure. Agriculture may have deepened the pattern because settled work rewards repetition. Fields, storage, food processing, grinding, weaving, cutting, and carrying all depend on reliable movements repeated across seasons. A tool that feels comfortable to the majority is more likely to be copied. A technique demonstrated by the majority is easier for many learners to mirror. A child born into such a world receives the old pattern through objects as much as through words. This is not so different from the older human beginning, when younger bodies watched older bodies handle stone, wood, skin, food, and fire. The materials changed, and the scale of society changed, but the body still learned by seeing how another body began. Over centuries, the right hand could become the ordinary hand of skill because it was already common in the people who made and taught skill. Writing made the matter even more visible. A mark on a surface carries the motion of the hand into a lasting record. The direction of writing, the tools used to write, and the posture of the writer can all make one hand easier than the other in different traditions. It would be wrong to claim that all writing systems favored the right hand in the same way. Yet many literate societies treated the right hand as the expected hand of instruction, and this expectation could become part of discipline. The hand was no longer simply reaching, cutting, or holding. It was learning letters, numbers, names, and sacred or legal words. A bodily majority became attached to authority. Warfare and formal labor added their own forms of standardization. Shields, weapons, drills, tools, workshops, and later machines often work more efficiently when many bodies are trained in a shared pattern. Standardization does not need to be cruel in order to be powerful. It can simply make one arrangement easier to teach and repeat. But for the left-handed minority, the same arrangement can create a quiet friction. The ancient variation that remained in the body now met a world increasingly shaped for the other side. Near the long origin of our species, handedness may have been a bodily tendency strengthened by tool use and imitation. In historical societies, it became something broader, a default embedded in work, education, craft, ritual, and design. The right hand became common in the body, then common in history, while the left hand continued to remind us that no civilization can fully erase the range of human movement, because the body always keeps more than one possible path alive. The cost of living in a right-handed world is often quiet enough to be ignored by those who do not pay it. A left-handed person may not face danger every day, yet small frictions can gather around ordinary acts. A desk may place support on the wrong side. A pair of scissors may press uncomfortably against the fingers. A writing hand may drag across fresh ink or graphite. A tool handle may curve for another grip. A musical instrument, a kitchen object, a machine, or a classroom demonstration may assume that the active hand will be the right one. None of these examples needs to be dramatic to matter. Their importance lies in repetition. A rare body meets a common design, and the meeting asks for adjustment again and again. In older societies, that adjustment could be more than inconvenience. It could become correction, discipline, or shame, especially where the right hand carried meanings of order, purity, skill, or respect. The left hand could be treated as improper, even when the person using it was simply following the body's natural path. This is one of the clearest ways culture can turn a biological minority into a social burden. The body itself is not wrong, but the world around it may be built as if only one kind of body were expected. This does not mean every historical society treated left-handed people cruelly, or that the same rule existed everywhere. The record is uneven, and customs varied widely. A careful story should not turn human history into a single harsh law. Still, it is reasonable to say that in many settings, right-handedness became the easier route because tools, instruction, and symbolic meanings favoured it. The left-handed child then had to learn two things at once: the task itself and the translation needed to perform the task in a world facing the other direction. This brings the question back to human origins in a quieter way. Near the beginning of our species, a minority hand preference may have been mainly a difference in bodily direction. A left-leading person could still hold, cut, carry, make, gesture, and learn. But as material culture became denser, as tools became more standardized, as teaching became more formal, and as writing tied the hand to public memory, the common side gained more support from the environment. The right hand did not only lead from inside the body, it was welcomed from outside the body. That outside welcome could make right-handedness feel more natural than it truly was, while making left-handedness feel more difficult than it needed to be. There is a deep lesson here about majorities. A majority does not always need to speak loudly. It can become a chair, a handle, a classroom rule, a ritual gesture, a weapon drill, a factory setting, or a word that carries approval. Once it becomes design, people may stop noticing that a choice was made at all. The right-handed person may feel no choice because the world answers smoothly. The left-handed person may feel the choice everywhere because the world asks for correction. Yet the left hand continues. It adapts, reverses, learns around obstacles, and sometimes changes the object itself. That persistence reminds us again that handedness is not a ranking of human worth. It is a meeting between body and history. The ancient split hidden in our bones became more visible when civilizations began building durable worlds around the common hand. The right side became a social default, and the left side became the quiet evidence that defaults are not the same as nature. This is why a sleepful look at the subject should stay gentle. The story is not about blaming the right hand or romanticizing the left. It is about seeing how an old bodily tendency can become a room, a tool, a lesson, and a pressure. To understand the split honestly, we have to listen to both, the ease of the majority and the small repeated effort of those whose bodies kept another direction alive. The old preference has not disappeared into museums. It is still present in the small objects that fill a modern day. A person may wake, reach for a phone, turn a handle, hold a toothbrush, open a drawer, use a kettle, press a pen to paper, move a computer mouse, cut food, fasten clothing, or hold a steering wheel, and each object quietly assumes something about the hand that will lead. Many of these assumptions are so ordinary that right-handed people rarely notice them. A handle sits at a convenient angle, a button falls under the expected finger, a notebook opens in a comfortable direction, a pair of scissors closes cleanly because the blades are pressed from the side for which they were designed. The world seems neutral because it fits. But for a left-handed person, neutrality can feel less certain. The same object may require a small rotation, a different posture, a crossed wrist, or a private adjustment no one else sees. These are not large tragedies. They are small reminders repeated through the day. And because repetition is how the body learns, these reminders matter. They show that handedness is not only inside the hand, it is also in the things the hand meets. This brings the question back toward the beginning of human life. Early hands met stone, wood, skin, fiber, food, and fire. Modern hands meet plastic, glass, paper, metal, keys, switches, screens, and machines. The materials have changed, but the relationship remains. The body reaches into a shaped world, and the shaped world teaches the body where ease is expected. A computer mouse, for example, is a recent object, but it carries an old pattern. One hand performs the visible control while the other often rests, supports, types, or steadies the body. A kitchen knife does the same in another form. One hand guides the edge while the other holds the food. A musical instrument may require both hands in complex roles, yet its teaching tradition can still assume which side should begin a certain motion. A school desk may place the writing surface where one body finds rest and another finds strain. Even doors and cabinets can reveal the common path when a handle welcomes one reach more naturally than another. None of these objects explains the ancient origin of right-handedness, but together they show how an old majority keeps renewing itself in design. The right hand became common in bodies, and then human-made objects made the common body more comfortable. That comfort then returned to new bodies as practice. A child learning to write on a page, swipe a screen, cut paper, or move a cursor is not thinking about fossils, tool-making, or brain asymmetry. Yet the child is entering a world already arranged by generations of hands. The old split hidden in bones becomes hidden again in plastic edges, metal hinges, classroom desks, and kitchen drawers. It is no longer only archaeological. It is domestic. It is technological. It is close enough to touch. This does not mean the right-handed world is deliberately unfair in every object. Often, design follows the majority because making one version is easier and cheaper than making many. Standard forms help factories, schools, offices, and households run smoothly, but smoothness for the majority can become effort for the minority. That is the quiet lesson of handedness in the modern world. A biological tendency can become a social environment, and a social environment can make the tendency look more natural than it is. Still, the left hand remains. It learns around objects, adapts tools, reverses motions, and sometimes asks the world to widen. In that request there is a deeper human value. Our bodies carry ancient patterns, but our cultures can choose how narrowly or generously to build around them. The right hand may reveal one long path taken by most human bodies, while the left hand reminds us that a path is not the whole landscape. To return to the question, we have to gather the path slowly. The right hand did not become common in a single scene. It did not rise because one ancient person made one discovery, or because one custom ordered everybody to obey. The story begins deeper, in a primate hand that once helped with grasping, climbing, holding, and feeling the world. It continues through the long change of upright walking, when the hands became less tied to carrying the body and more available for carrying objects. It passes through the unequal cooperation of two sides, one often steadying while the other acts. It enters the nervous system, where the two halves of the brain communicate and specialize without becoming simple opposites. It leaves faint traces in bones, teeth, and tools, not as full answers, but as cautious marks of repeated use. It moves through childhood, where every new person learns direction through reaching, failure, success, watching, and practice. It survives in the left-handed minority, reminding us that a strong tendency is not an absolute law. It grows inside culture, where tools, gestures, writing, teaching, work, and design make the common hand feel even more natural. When all these layers are placed together, the ancient split hidden in our bones begins to look less like a secret locked in one place, and more like a long braid of body, task, learning, and history. That is why the question matters. It is not only about which hand signs a name or lifts a cup. It is about how human beings became creatures of organized action. Near the beginning of our species, survival depended not simply on strength, but on repeated coordination. A stone had to be held and struck. Food had to be gathered and prepared. A child had to be carried. A gesture had to be seen. A movement had to be copied before it could become skill. In such a world, a small side preference could become useful, then familiar, then visible to others, then easier to teach, then built into objects, and finally mistaken for plain nature. The right hand may have become the common path because many forces leaned in the same direction over a very long time. Biology may have offered the first uneven ground. Practice may have worn a track across it. Social learning may have helped others follow. Culture may have paved the track until it felt like the only road. Yet the left hand remained, and its presence keeps the answer honest. Human beings were never designed as identical instruments. We are populations, not copies. We carry tendencies, but also variations. We inherit bodies, but we also grow those bodies inside specific worlds. The hand that reaches today is therefore both personal and ancient. It belongs to one person, one childhood, one daily life. But it also belongs to an older pattern of movement that began before writing, before cities, before any explanation of the brain, and before anyone could ask why one side felt more ready than the other. To study handedness is to notice how much history can hide inside a gesture that seems too small to question. The cup lifted from a table, the page held steady, the door opened in the dark, the tool turned in the palm. Each simple act carries the quiet evidence that the human body is not a finished diagram, but a living archive. The split between right and left is one page in that archive, written not with ink, but with nerves, muscles, bones, practice, imitation, and time. It asks us to see ordinary comfort as evidence, and to treat the body with humility, because what feels natural may simply be what countless lives have practiced before us, quietly, without leaving their names behind. The hand is familiar, but its familiarity is made from very old time, and from lives we can no longer see. The lesson of handedness is not that one side of the body is better than the other. The lesson is that the human body is a history, not a perfect blueprint. When people imagine the body, they often imagine a design. 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 arms, 2 legs, a left side and a right side, arranged as if fairness were the goal. But living bodies were not made to satisfy symmetry. They were shaped through survival, growth, accidents, habits, limits, and repeated success. A body does not need to be perfectly even in order to be deeply capable. It needs enough order to act, enough flexibility to learn, and enough variation to keep different lives possible. Right-handedness shows this in a very quiet way. Most people do not feel it as an evolutionary inheritance. They feel it as ease. The hand moves before the thought becomes clear. The cup is lifted, the door is opened, the tool is guided, the page is held in place. Yet ease is not emptiness. Ease has a past. It can be built from countless small acts repeated by bodies that never knew they were contributing to a pattern. Near the beginning of human life, there were no written records to explain the first deep habits of the hand. There were bodies facing material problems. There were stones to hold, foods to prepare, children to carry, gestures to share, and movements to learn from others. In that world, a hand preference could become useful without becoming conscious. A small leaning could become a stable role. A stable role could become visible to learners. A visible role could become easier to copy. Over generations, what began as bodily organization could become human tradition. This is why the right hand should not be treated as a winner, and the left hand should not be treated as a failure. The 2 hands belong to one system. They divide the work of attention, force, balance, and touch. One hand often changes the world, while the other keeps the world steady enough to be changed. If one side became more common as the acting side, that does not make the other side less important. It simply reveals how cooperation can exist inside a single body. The same idea reaches beyond hands. Human beings often live through asymmetries they barely notice. The heart sits to one side. The brain divides and specializes. The eyes and ears may not guide us equally in every task. The feet may begin motion differently. Even memory and habit take paths that feel natural because they have been traveled before. The body is full of old arrangements that work well enough. Not because they are perfect, but because they were repeated into reliability. This is a more useful message than any claim of secret superiority. It teaches humility. What feels normal may be ancient, but it may also be partial. What is common may be powerful, but it is not the whole of humanity. A left-handed person reminds the majority that the common path is not the only path. A right-handed world reminds the minority how deeply design can follow numbers. Together, they show that human life is shaped by both tendency and difference. Near our origins, this would have been true in every generation. Some bodies moved from the common side, some moved from another side. All had to join the shared labour of living. Each body carried its own small direction into a world that needed shared work more than perfect sameness. The value of the question is therefore not only scientific, it is educational. It asks us to look at the familiar body with patience. It asks us to see that ordinary movements can carry evidence of evolution, development, culture, and time. It asks us to be careful with simple answers, Because the most lasting human patterns are often made from many causes braided so tightly that no single thread can claim the whole story. The final value of this question is not that it gives the body a simple label, it teaches us how carefully we should read ourselves. A hand rising from the right side may feel too ordinary to deserve attention, yet it carries many layers at once. It carries the old primate inheritance of grasping and touch. It carries the long change of walking upright, when the hands became more available for objects, children, food, and tools. It carries the asymmetry of the nervous system, where the body is coordinated through difference rather than perfect sameness. It carries the memory of repeated work, where one hand often held and the other acted. It carries the marks of learning, because a child does not inherit finished skill, but grows into it by watching, failing, repeating, and slowly finding ease. It carries culture too, because once a majority becomes large enough, the world begins to welcome the majority hand in tools, writing, gestures, classrooms, machines, and daily design. None of these layers alone is the whole answer. Together, they create a more truthful picture. Right-handedness is not a sudden victory of one side, but a long human arrangement, renewed each time a body reaches into the world and finds one direction easier to begin. This is the message worth keeping. The human body is not only flesh in the present, it is a quiet archive of time. Some pages are written in bones, some in nerves, some in childhood habits, some in the tools people make, and some in the expectations so familiar that no one notices them anymore. When most humans use the right hand, we are seeing more than a preference. We are seeing how evolution, development, social learning, and material culture can braid together until the result feels like nature. Yet the left hand remains, and its presence protects the story from becoming too narrow. It reminds us that what is common is not the same as what is complete. It reminds us that the minority path can still be fully human, fully capable, and deeply skilled. It reminds us that our species has always lived through variation, not uniformity. Near the beginning of human life, this may have been essential. A group did not need identical bodies. It needed bodies that could learn, cooperate, adapt, carry, make, gesture, and share attention. Some bodies leaned one way, some another, but all belonged to the same unfinished human experiment. That is why this subject should leave us not with shock, but with patience. The small movement of a hand can teach humility. It shows that the ordinary body is not simple. It shows that comfort may have a history. It shows that design can follow the majority until the majority mistakes itself for the natural shape of the world. It also shows that difference can persist quietly for thousands of generations, not as a mistake, but as part of the range that life keeps open. When you next reach for a cup, steady a page, turn a key, hold a child, or rest one hand inside the other, the movement may pass too quickly to notice. But beneath that movement is a long story of balance and imbalance, of learning and inheritance, of bodies trying to make action reliable in a world that never waited for perfect symmetry. The right hand may be the common path, but it is only one path through the human body's deep history. And if a gesture as small as reaching can carry so much forgotten time, then how many other quiet habits inside us are still holding stories we have not yet learned how to read?